Great. Well, thank you, everybody. So apologies for the delay today. A couple of technical issues. I'm Stuart Wolf, and I lead the cybersecurity practice across Canada for Dimension Data. Responsible for advisory, implementation, and managed services. And
Danika, Blessman. I'm a senior threat intelligence analyst for NTT Security.
And NTT, for those of you who don't know, NTT and Dimension Data are one company. We're actually merging together into a much bigger organization over the next year. But lots of exciting things happening from a managed integration and advisory perspective. Great, so I just want to talk a little bit about our global threat capability. So we have a very large managed security services capability around the world. I think we had originally like 20 security operations centers from acquisitions, and we managed to right-size that, downsize that, I think, to about 10 security operations centers globally. They don't follow the sun model, so within each geography they run 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, with a massive threat intelligence piece. Behind that, looking at all of the traffic in the world to be able to figure out what the latest threats are. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you do as well.
Sure. Won't go into detail about all the specific groups that go into the Global Threat Intelligence Center, which is the primary
Research arm, I guess, right?
Yeah, research arm.
Yeah.
Words are hard. We put together the Global Threat Intelligence Report. Keep in mind, though, that we're not the only one. We truly are a global, or this truly is a global report. We take in data, and we have research teams and analysts across the globe that put work into this. So it's not just the GTIC. But yeah, the heart of what we do is research, vulnerability research, threat research, malware research. Part of that involves reverse engineering of malware samples, just to try and get to the heart of what the threat actors are doing against clients.
The other piece that we have too as well is a big incident response capability. So there's incident response, threat detection, forensics capabilities, working with our customers to be able to detect what the actual problem is and helping to resolve that. So the threat intelligence is obviously one piece. The ongoing monitoring and detection is another piece. And that includes from device management as well as to the new industry obviously is moving towards managed detection and response, statistical behavioral analysis, rather than just rules-based SIEM log collection. Because obviously when stuff is written to a log, it's too late. So we're very much into that advanced type of threat analytics, as well as combine that with our threat research and our threat researchers that work globally around the world. Next slide. So we see probably about 40% of the internet traffic that's out there today, and visibility is really key when you want to look for threats that are going on in the world, figure out what the next attacks are, being able to tell our customers what the next attacks are that are coming down the pipe so that they can protect themselves. And all that threat research goes into our SOC capabilities as well, working closely with the analysts to be able to determine what the problems are and telling our customers to protect themselves, so being very proactive rather than reactive. And we analyze a huge amount. 6.1 trillion logs are analyzed every day. Over 150 million attacks that we see. It's just a huge amount of stuff that goes on. And all of that, we work with 10,000 different clients around the world globally to help them out. So as far as we came up with a 2018 Key Insights report. We're also working on a 2019 report as well. One of the big challenges that we have out there, we see out there today, is impacting the supply chain. A lot of malicious attackers are trying to impact business, bring them down, steal information. A lot of it could be cyber terrorism, and some of it is just theft of intellectual assets and being able to sell that to competitors. The ransomware is actually kind of an interesting one too, because we're seeing healthcare as being one of the biggest attacked areas for ransomware. And we're now starting to see ransomware just not on only IT, but also on the OT end, or also on the IoT end. So we're actually seeing hospital equipment that's required for saving lives being affected by ransomware, which is really critical. And there's, in the healthcare sector, we're seeing a lot of infections from everything from IT end on the IV pumps, as well as to devices that are used to restart your heart, right? And you can hack into those with 3G connections, and you can infect them as well. And then just general hygiene in hospitals, just because the way doctors work, not necessarily the best. So what happens is they get easily infected, whether it's through a malware infection, through ransomware, or whether it's through user awareness training. One kind of an interesting story, I was with my wife about a year ago, and she broke her ankle. We ended up in the hospital, and the doctor left the room with the screen up and running with the IP address hard-coded on the screen. And you could easily click on the screen, click on an icon, order a particular X-ray that you wanted, and easily steal information. But in that kind of environment, this is actually in the emergency wards. There's a lot of people coming and going, and so they just leave these screens unlocked. They don't really think about security, and they'll just click on stuff whenever they need to. And so ransomware becomes a really big issue in the healthcare, big in the education arena as well too. So very much something that's important to look for. The IT and the OT end is also becoming an increasingly attacked industry. There's a prediction that's going to be about 50 billion devices by next year of things that are connected. So we're seeing a lot of attacks, now service attacks launched from home devices, right? So I have, for example, my stove that's on my phone, and I can actually see when my oven's on, when my oven's off. I can remotely control it, but it also has an IP address and is connected to the internet now. There's some element of trust that, in fact, they're actually encrypting the connection when connecting to the internet, but who really knows, right? But you can launch attacks now from these different IoT home devices that we never saw within the corporate world. There's actually a story, I don't know if you read that, last week, where one of the cameras, I think it was a Nest camera, that was used in somebody's house, and they actually hacked into the house. It was just a kid just messing around and said, hey, by the way, I can see you. And then somebody looked up in their house and said, who are you? And you just hear this voice over the camera, but it's actually somebody that actually hacked into the house. And so it's, the vulnerabilities are just becoming more and more complex as we enable everything to be internet connected, whether it's from clothing all the way through to household items, and then within the manufacturing world, the OT end is kind of really interesting too, because in a manufacturing environment, you think about it, they don't operate like IT. So typically OT and IT have operated in separate worlds. You see that in the mining industry, you see it in the utilities business. We have equipment that's old. I mean, it's been around for 30 years, not designed to be connected to the internet, not patched properly, can't produce logs. And so all this becomes a security risk, and you have vendors now coming into the environment to do maintenance, or also outsourcing support of some of your manufacturing OT equipment now to third-party providers. So the whole industry is becoming much more complex to try to secure in a non-IP traffic-enabled world. Definitely the OT and the IoT is really an interesting piece. And then the other piece is around compliance and cybersecurity. So this is kind of an interesting one. So compliance and risk are not the same thing, and a lot of people think that they are. That the compliance are going to be okay. So, for example, I could be traveling down the highway, and I could have a perfectly sunny day in a car that doesn't have any safety features in it. But meanwhile, my risk profile is low because it's a sunny day, but I'm not in compliance because I'm actually speeding. I'm going more than 100 kilometers an hour. So risk profile low, but you're still out of compliance. So compliance and risk are not really equal. The other thing is that I could be traveling in really bad weather, but going slower than the speed limit. And I have all of these safety mechanisms in the car to be able to detect when I'm going off the road, blind spot protection, all that kind of stuff. So my risk profile is low-ish, but I'm in compliance because I'm going under 100 kilometers an hour. So just because you're in compliance doesn't mean you still have risk, and just because you risk doesn't mean you're in compliance. So vice versa, right? So it's slightly different. And the other thing is, so I'm actually, I should mention when I introduce myself, so I'm a member of ISACA. I'm CISA IT audit certified, and I also was an ISACA instructor and taught the security portion of the CISA course when I worked in the Big Four. And I'm also a CISM as well, my second ISACA certification as a certified security manager. I definitely understand the IT world. But I think one of the pieces for the auditors in the room is that just because you check something off on a checklist doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure, right? And so compliance Doesn't necessarily always mean that. I mean, there's a lot of good intention in compliance standards, but we need to make sure that, in fact, that what we're looking at is secure. And we have to have a regular program, because just because you're secure today, just because I'm PCI certified today, doesn't mean that I'm not going to be attacked tomorrow. Right? So it's a constant program looking at the controls that you have, the effectiveness of the controls, and making sure that the controls themselves are effective as you go along in your security program and align that with the business. And the final piece is around incident response. And so incident response is really critical, not just from how do we actually respond to an incident. A lot of customers don't have an incident response program, but also walking through tabletop exercises. So getting a meeting with your executives, getting a meeting with your middle management, and trying to figure out, okay, well, if I have an attack, how do I actually handle that? How do I handle the press? How do I handle my third parties? How do I contain the actual breaches that are going on? So those pieces of incident response are really important, in addition to having an incident response plan, and then also having incident response capability when you're actually attacked, to be able to then respond and contain the actual threat and the vulnerability within your environment. So all very important pieces that are changing landscape out there. The world is becoming more complex, more interconnected, and everything from IoT and ransomware attacks, it seems like it's just constantly becoming more and more. Part of the biggest problem is that we don't really know where the data is in our environments. We have ineffective classification schemes, and so being able to try to fix the problem and find out what you actually have out there becomes more and more increasingly difficult. And so the way that we do that is we kind of patch it. Right? We just basically say, okay, well, let's put in a SIEM solution, I'm going to be okay. Or let me get myself certified and I'm compliance, and I'll get the auditors and regulators off my back and I'm okay. But you're not more secure, right? And the reality is we're still being attacked and we're still seeing major breaches that are out there. We've had major breaches we just saw in the news recently as well, right? So in the hotel business, right? So these attacks are very real, and the cyber criminals are very well funded. Right? They're hiring people out of university, and the Italian mafia, the Russian mafias are very big into that, right? And it's a huge business. There's also one last thing I'll just mention on this slide is that there's also as a service models now in the cyber criminal industry. So if you want to launch a denial of service attack, you can actually go online, rent some equipment basically as a service, and pay a monthly fee to get full SLAs with that and launch an attack against whoever you want to. So the world is becoming more and more scary in that respect, but we have to make sure that we have good hygiene and make sure that we have right visibility is key. So hygiene and visibility are the two most important things to make sure that we're secure. Next slide. What do you want to see? Next slide.
Yep.
Okay. So let's quickly speak to this. So as far as the global findings that we found, so United States, obviously the infrastructure, kind of one of the highest impacted areas. Finance was really top, and the reason why finance is top is because there's a lot more going on. They tend to invest a lot more dollars. They tend to be a lot more kind of risk adverse in this, or not risk adverse. They tend to be a lot more risky in the sense that they're trying to grow their business as fast as they can and compete in the financial world. And what happens is the hackers are obviously seeing that, a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on. And as soon as you see that in the news, and okay, well, mergers and acquisitions, probably that might be a good target for me, because that the companies that they're buying, they're trying to integrate them. The technologies may not be the same, so they may lack visibility. They may not have the same policy standards. A lot of different issues go on with that. So anytime you have like an industry that's going through a lot of changes, especially with the banking 4.0 in the finance world, there's a lot of changes that are going on today. So for example, what we're seeing now is a change where the new generation really wants to do everything online. And so they call it the unbanked. And so they're now competing against the traditional banks for services and be able to do everything online. But with that, introduces new threats. And really one cool example, on kind of a side note, around the banking and how they're becoming more technologically advanced to be able to service their customers. Imagine when you walk into a car dealership. What's the first thing you do when you go to a car dealership? You find a car, right? Then you say, hey, I like that, let's take it for a test drive, sit down with the sales guy, and then sit down with finance after and try to figure out, well, hey, can I afford that or not, right? And then, but imagine the reverse happening, where you walk into the car dealership, your phone knows, based on your geolocation, where you are, connected to your bank says, hey, you happen to walk into Ford, you can afford a car within this price range, so before you even look for the car, you already know what you can afford, right? Really interesting kind of concept. So this is where the banks are becoming more connected. Everything's all coming together, but with that introduces privacy. right? I mean, the phone knows where I am, which is kind of creepy, and also knows what I can afford because it was connected to my bank, and hopefully that was a secure connection, and nobody actually saw the data that was transferred to my phone. So a lot of different complex issues, but very much change in the finance industry, technology as well, because the IT industry is also going through a lot of flux and changes and very competitiveness. I mentioned about the ransomware, really big increase, and especially in the healthcare sector, is a big area. Keyloggers, you're typing on your computer, reporting what your passwords are, which has actually been around for years as a problem. Business and professional services is kind of new. This is actually the first time that we saw it in our top 5 list as being one of the big areas. And then finance and healthcare we already mentioned, right? So, did you want to add anything?
I think the business and professional services kind of goes back to the supply chain attack. Rather than actors targeting a company directly, they can go through, a business and professional services company and attack more than one company at a time. That's their goal. So targeted industries were kind of interesting last year. As Stu mentioned, finance was the most attacked sector globally. It was also number 1 or number 2 in most regions. Technology was number 2 globally, and that was the only industry sector to appear in the top 5 most attacked sectors in every single region. So we mentioned business and professional services was near the top 5, and in EMEA it was the most attacked sector. Sorry, the internet keeps popping up from Pan Pacific on here.
One thing I will mention on here too is like education's an interesting one because, and I actually was working on a special project last year for Duke University where the big concern right now in the post-secondary world is that students are actually making a choice on what university they want to attend, not based on academics, but based on how good the wireless connection is. It's true. And so what's happening is they're worried about losing business because people aren't going to go if the wireless sucks, right? And so along with that, of course, is a lot of new devices, IoT devices coming into the universities now that you didn't see before, smart TVs, right? So the 2 biggest impacts from the security perspective is after Christmas time and after summer break, because they come back in with all kinds of new devices that they want to connect, right? And that becomes a problem for the IT staff to try to support all that. And so, some of the ways around that, of course, is having network access control 802.1x to be able to authenticate these devices and identify the devices before you allow them to connect. But you now have to do 802.1x against your TV, smart TV, which we didn't really have to do before. So, there's a lot of different complexities that are happening on the education side. And manufacturing obviously is critical. So we talked about the IT and the OT and becoming more connected. Government is an interesting one as well too, especially with electronic government. There's so much going on globally within the public sector to try to secure themselves. They are very good as far as like data classification in the military as well too. Probably one of the top out there as far as having proper classification on data. And obviously you need a lot of different security clearances to do different things. But again, the government is also very decentralized too, and they're trying to centralize a lot of the functions and make that more efficient, which also requires a lot of standardization and security and policies, etc. If you want to add on that. I don't know if you want to talk on some of these pieces here. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. This is pretty self-explanatory. Retail fell. This is what you were talking about.
So one of the biggest challenges around the retail sector, typically lack of investment has always been a really key issue. So being able to, and they haven't also always had a lot of money as well. So retail typically tends to be very underfunded, tends to be a very good target for hackers. And finance also is an interesting one. So I had a conversation actually last week, and this is with a very large bank, global bank. And the person I was speaking to said that, with our risk tolerance, our risk posture, because security is obviously about risk and what the amount that you're actually willing to tolerate, right? Figure out. So any type of security really is all about locking everything down, not trusting anything. But as soon as you start to trust, you introduce risk. And so the person had said to me, well, we might lose $1.5 billion on a particular attack, and we get cyber insurance against that, and the executives feel it's not an issue because $1.5 billion represents about a day and a half worth of revenue for the bank. So why should I put any security controls in to protect myself? So I thought, okay, so now that you're, as a hacker, and I used to be a professional hacker back in the day, I would think to myself, okay, you have a vulnerability that's not closed, right? You have a threat and a vulnerability, and so because I'm vulnerable, I'm not going to close that part. I'm going to go back in and steal another $1.5 billion. So how many times before I steal $1.5 billion all the time does it actually become an issue? And also, I'm going to land on your servers and do a reconnaissance and then try to go spread myself out and see what other systems I can attach to. So now I'm going to steal your payroll data so your employees don't get paid, and I'm going to steal your competitive information and sell it. We actually see that, by the way, too, in the manufacturing sector, or in the mining sector, which is actually really interesting because in the mining sector, it takes on average around 10 years to be able to figure out where to dig. So as a hacker, I would want to steal that intellectual capital and sell that to the next company so that they can actually dig first, right? So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that. And also in the manufacturing environment, they're becoming more and more automated, a lot more remote control, and RFID hacking. I actually watched a really cool video a couple of weeks ago of this company that was hacking RFID and getting like cranes to actually in shipping yards actually to move the cranes just through hacking into the RFID, which is really kind of scary. Next slide.
As far as attack sources go, the data was kind of what we expected, or we typically see. The United States and China were the most common attack sources in most regions. There was one notable exception, the Netherlands. We saw in the top 5 attack sources in almost every region. It was number 6 in EMEA by less than 0.25% though. So we're starting to see this trend where a country with really good infrastructure and bandwidth and servers and such are being used by cyber criminals rather than going through their own servers in their home countries, for instance. So they can hide better that way and have better bandwidth at the same time.
The other thing that we're seeing in the Asian countries is typically they're more focused on compliance, and again, they're thinking that compliance makes them secure, and we talked about that earlier, and that's not the case. So, you're going to start to see an increase in attacks happening within that sector because of the reliance on compliance as kind of being the only kind of security market. So, a lot of interesting stuff going on. Next slide, please. So, this kind of, repeats a bit of stuff, but, the spyware keyloggers, specifically higher in the USA, which I thought was kind of interesting, but again, a lot of financial activity, ransomware, big problem. MIA was probably the most attacked, but as I say, by sector, healthcare is one of the biggest impacted. Virus and worms within Asia Pacific, and that's also because of their focus on compliance rather than on the security controls, to make themselves more secure. And malware, the primary driver, right? So we're seeing that malware affected for ransomware and multiple different attacks. So important to protect yourself at the network layer as well as obviously on the endpoint.
Another thing of note maybe on this slide is that it highlights that attackers aren't doing the same thing everywhere. They're kind of basing their attacks on what works best in each region. In the Americas, finance was the most attacked industry sector. Had 43% of all attacks against targets in the Americas. Technology companies were the victims of 27% of attacks, leaving finance and technology companies combined for 70% of all victims in the Americas. So the other 30% is split among the remaining 16 industry sectors. Attacks against manufacturing in the Americas fell from 23% in 2016 to 5% in 2017. And China and the United States combined to cover 62% of all attacks targeting the Americas.
And as mentioned, right, finance is the most attacked because they tend to be the most innovative and trying to change the way that they do business. So they become more competitive, and change introduces in mergers and acquisitions, et cetera, introduces a lot more vulnerability and risk. The next statistic. So gaming is kind of gaming and healthcare probably the two top, but for ransomware. But gaming is kind of an interesting one too, because in the gaming industry, they tend to be very good. For example, in taking casinos, they're good with physical security, but logical security not so much. And user awareness training obviously is critical in that. But one of the coolest hacks I ever saw in the gaming industry was you throw a USB key in the employee parking lot, right? And you have like ransomware infected malware on your USB key. Well, the first thing you would do as an employee is you see a USB key on the ground, you're going to pick it up. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to put it into your computer, and then I've infected your machine. So no matter how much good security you have, I now have a back way into your casino. I've also seen that in gaming industry and horse track racing in the U.S., where in the breezeways you can bet on the horses, but the machines were actually directly connected to the back-end data center and not segmented at all. So you can actually hack into the back-end data center while you're sitting in the breezeway. So gaming is definitely kind of an interesting one, and online gaming as well too. It's based on a lot of viruses. But definitely keep an eye on the manufacturing world as well, and healthcare too, as I mentioned, are very big industries. I think we beat ransomware to death.
Yeah. It just shows, regardless of industry, it was a big threat last year.
The other thing with ransomware too, and this is I was actually involved in one customer that had an attack last year. They were so badly impacted that they actually affected all of their systems and encrypted everything going back 2 years. And so the only way you can recover from something like that is to pay the ransom. And so the question became, you pay the ransom for how many machines? And so what they wanted to do was basically the only recommendation we could make was pay enough ransom to be able to get a couple of machines that you can actually restore from backup and then get your operation back up and running. Because literally they would have been back 2 years behind. All their backups were encrypted with ransomware, and all their production machines were encrypted with ransomware. So very much a real threat, a real business impact that can take you out of business very quickly, and a huge revenue impact for that. So next slide. Just want to add something. An incident response, again, like we did mention, that incident response is really critical about finance and healthcare. I mean, that's kind of goes hand in hand with the ransomware on the healthcare side we talk about, and the finance because of the amount of change that they're going through. But as I said, with incident response, right, make sure that you did have the program in place, tabletop exercises to actually run through what would actually happen during an incident, and then also have the capability to be able to respond and contain and also provide the forensics, be able to collect the evidence forensically so that this is admissible in court and not modified as well. So, these are kind of the best, normal recommendations, right? So the main thing is, I've been in this security field for a long, long time, right? And security is always, especially when I started, security was always an afterthought. There weren't dedicated C-level, people that were focused on security. The security guys were, mainframe guys that have been doing RACF for years. And, that's changed a lot, right? So the board's becoming more aware. Security threats and attacks, stealing of credit card data is becoming more commonplace. So the average person who doesn't know about security is now starting to really become security aware, and that's translating into business. But it's most important to embed security right from the beginning, right? So we always say that, right? Security quite often isn't brought in at the beginning because they see us being a business, not a business enabler, but inhibiting the business from being able to get their projects done. But what happens is you write code. If you don't embed code, secure code into the beginning, then you get a SQL injection vulnerability at the end or a cross-site scripting attack. But the best thing to do is to bring the security guys in when you're planning the business initiative, help with the actual design right from the beginning of the project all the way through, and then testing right before deployment. And it's all about culture, right? So you want to have alignment. We talked about that in the SAC end as well, right? For those who have done the governance certification, it's alignment with the business, making sure that you have KPIs and KRIs to show the business your success that you have in your security programs and the investments that you're making. Make user awareness training programs with your users and campaigns so they understand what to do. Have effective data classification, so you tell the user, I want you to handle this particular data in this way because this is what's sensitive to us. They're all very critical. Defense in depth obviously is important, but the whole world today is becoming a lot more difficult or a lot more different, where it's no longer just self-contained. We have hybrid worlds now where we're dealing with cloud environments and authenticating to cloud environments and using CASB and SIG solutions, as well as just protecting the data center itself, the inside and the outside. And of course, it's a big movement with Forrester's Zero Trust to essentially trust nothing and have everything authenticate. But you really need that end-to-end and have that end-to-end east-west traffic visibility as well as the north-south visibility is really key. I think I beat up ransomware a couple of times. That slider, that's pretty much it. Yeah, so there are reports that we have. I believe in 2019, I'm not sure when that's coming out, but there's a couple links we can provide you in the presentation that give you some of our research that's done by the Global Threat Research organization that we have. Are there any questions that anybody has today?
I guess I had one quick question about the heavily weighted finance sector.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any impact based on their amount of regulation for disclosure?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with the new laws in Canada now having to disclose the GDPR as well for Europe, which it requires a lot of compliance with privacy and GDPR regulations. But I definitely actually we lack data breach stats in Canada because it hasn't been a requirement to do that. But definitely an impact on the financial industry for sure. I think part of the challenge that I've seen with a lot of financial institutions is that they don't necessarily know where all the data is. Some of them have flat networks, not bigger banks, but obviously a lot of them have flat networks. Some of them have the right visibility, and too many investments in disparate technologies don't give them the right visibility, which impacts all that. But definitely impact on the finance sector and multiple different industries as well. You see that as well in the finance sector?
It's really just a question around the big changes in where you're seeing attacks and sort of what's driving it.
I mean, in the online, as banks become more and more online and more competitive against the non-banks as well, and as they try to with more mobile services, they're definitely opening themselves up to more risk than they were before, kind of self-contained mainframe world environments. But the bank is definitely exposing themselves a lot more to it before. But again, everything in security is all about risk and your tolerance of risk, right? And as soon as you start to do different things or open up, you have to figure out what your risk tolerance is, what you can afford to implement controls. And then, of course, the number one deal in security is you never invest more in protecting a particular asset than what the assets were to do it as a business, right? So, but major changes. The bank is definitely under disruption. It was a comment that was made, I guess I read it a couple of years ago, that 4 out of 10 businesses, if they don't reinvent the way they do business, it will be obsolete in 10 years. And the banking industry is definitely part of that. So everybody's trying to reinvent the way they go to market and change. Not the acceleration from a security perspective.
Yes, Scott? In one of the earlier slides, you showed the IoT and OT in one box, essentially. Even that there are so significant differences between those attack surfaces, what do you see as common between those two? And do you see some kind of threat that's common to both of those?
I think IT and OT, well, I don't know if it's necessarily showing the box as a commonality, I think it's just more that, you know, the IT, OT worlds are starting to come together, and they typically have always been very separate and haven't necessarily liked each other, and didn't want to necessarily talk to each other, right? The engineers and the IT guys were always kind of separate. But as you connect them up, right, layers 3 and layer 4 are becoming more and more connected, you want to be able to see the protocols that are coming through, be able to implement controls within that environment and have the visibility, right, which is really key, especially with non-IP traffic. And also, you're starting to see now that the C-level executives and CIOs on the IT end are now becoming responsible for the OT end, which I think is actually key. Because if you don't have one body looking over both sides, then you always have that competing, right, forces. So I think in that way, they are coming together for sure. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Would you go back one slide, please, so we can see the URLs?
Yep.
Thank you.
That one.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions here? Yep.
You had this set on the ransomware around this 350% increase year over year, but I saw another stat on the slide that said that incident response to ransomware had gone down 17% year over year. What's the insight in the correlation there?
Yeah, I think my
Those up, ones went down.
yeah, I think so. So I think my take on that is that from an incident response perspective, there's only so much you can do with ransomware. Right? So they kind of learned that a lot of people that are affected with ransomware either are trying to handle it internally and not actually bring in like a formal incident response from a third-party provider. They're essentially, like I had one friend of mine that works in the healthcare sector and responsible for IT, and they were affecting like, I think it was like 20,000 machines. And rather than actually declaring a formal incident, they just went through and re-imaged all their machines, right? And they were down in the hospital for like 4 days, which obviously impacts the ability to be able to schedule surgery and other, like, just like real impacts, right? But, so I think there's a decline in that. And secondly, that from a ransomware perspective, like if you're infected, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do when you're actually attacked to try to solve that problem. But there are technologies that you can implement from an incident response perspective to help detect ongoing post-incident, right, to be able to see what's going on with the network. So I think that's where you're kind of seeing a little bit of difference, where a lot of people are sort of handling that on their own from a ransomware perspective and not necessarily declaring an official incident response on it. And that's kind of causing the delta. That's been my experience anyway. I'm not sure what you've seen.
That, and I think people are just, it's so prevalent now, people are just better prepared for it with backups and.
Usual awareness training that everything doesn't get encrypted.
Yeah.
Or encrypted, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your time.